The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. This week, Miles Rapoport of the Kennedy School at Harvard on what we learned from the president's ill-fated Voter Integrity Commission. Author and organizer Amanda Litman on recruiting progressive millennials to run for office. And Bill Press talks with Adam Smith of Every Voice on how everyday people can have a bigger voice in politics. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Last year, Donald Trump established the Bipartisan Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, with a mandate to uncover widespread voter fraud. Less than half a year later, it was dissolved, leaving behind not a shred of evidence to support the president's bogus claims. Miles Rapoport has spent his career strengthening democracy and says the commission was a failure from the start. And we say hello to Miles Rapoport, longtime democracy advocate who served as Secretary of State in Connecticut and president of both Demos and Common Cause. He is the senior practice fellow in American democracy at the Ash Center of the Kennedy School at Harvard and a member of the board of the American Prospect. Miles Rapoport, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.
And our pleasure to have you with us as well. 6 months after it began, the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity is now disbanded. Any surprise there for you?
I have to say I really was not surprised at all. I think from the very beginning, back in May, when the commission was created, it has been a textbook example of what not to do if you want to have a bipartisan commission. You know, we have historically some really good examples. There was the Carter-Ford Commission, the Bauer-Ginsburg Commission, that looked into elections after the 2000 elections and in other times, and came up with some really, really good bipartisan solutions that improved elections. But this commission, the Pence-Kobach Commission, let's call it, started out with a clear bias, which is that there's massive voter fraud, according to President Trump. He appointed people to the commission who have been, dead set on finding massive voter fraud, even when almost every expert, I would say every expert, agrees that it simply doesn't exist. And so it was a partisan overreach from day one. It was incompetently run, so I was not at all surprised to see it meet its end.
What are the lessons we should draw, not only from the idea of the commission, but also from the way it went about its work?
Well, I think that in order for a commission, a presidential commission, or this applies at the state level, I think to have real credibility, with voters and with legislatures as well, it needs to be genuinely bipartisan. So I think you have to have kind of equally, people of stature that lead the commission from both sides. It has to have a mission that is broad enough so that it can take account varying points of view and try to synthesize them into a genuine positive solution. And it has to be very, very clear and careful about process, about notice, about following open meeting rules, about, transparency. And this commission was a kind of a model of non-transparency, overreach of the rules. The members of the commission, including Secretary of State Dunlap and Secretary of State Gardner, from Maine and New Hampshire, respectively, were kept in the dark about what was going on. And so, I think all of the things that would inspire confidence from the media, from the citizens, from the election officials around the country were absolutely absent in the Kobach Commission here.
When, throughout American history, it can certainly be argued that voter fraud campaigns are often really about voter suppression, especially in African American and immigrant communities. first of all, do you agree with that? And what are some examples that we're seeing today?
I think it's important to say at the beginning, from the outset, that we really do want elections that are clean and have integrity, and where people who are all people who are eligible to vote are encouraged to do so, and people who are not eligible to vote do not do so. So, the notion that somehow, Democrats or anyone just wants people to vote or vote twice or vote illegally just for partisan advantage, I think is wrong and extremely rare. So I think what you often have, though, is that the voter fraud issue has become a vehicle for people who are concerned or who want to suppress the vote of people who they think might vote, in ways that they don't want them to vote. So the African American community has been subjected to all kinds of voter suppressive efforts over the years. The Latino community, young people, students, have had laws designed to discourage them from voting. So I think you do have a history of this. Courts have ruled against it. The Voting Rights Act helped to prevent it, but I think it has a persistence to it that I think is very troubling.
Well, the other thing that I don't understand is what's the purpose? Because there hasn't been any clear evidence of any sort of major voter fraud in any modern election. So why this time around is this all of a sudden rearing its ugly head again, if you will?
Well, not to be cynical, but I think that cynicism is justified here. I think the electorate is changing. The country is getting more and more multiracial. The communities of color are getting more and more powerful. And so if you want to keep things the way they were and kind of hold on to power even though the demographics are shifting, then one way to do it is to find ways of preventing people from voting. So, whether it's voter ID laws or the felony disenfranchisement laws. So we have in this country 4.7 million people, disproportionately African American and Latino, who have completed their sentence, are out of prison, but still are denied the right to vote. Florida has a huge proportion of them, and those are policies that were created, 150 years ago after the Reconstruction, and are persisting today. So yes, I think it's a way of holding back the tide, and I think it has to end.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Miles Rapoport, senior practice fellow in American democracy at the Ash Center of the Kennedy School at Harvard, and a member of the board of the American Prospect. Of course, former Secretary of State in Connecticut and president of both Demos and Common Cause. Miles, President Trump said he wants the Department of Homeland Security to pick up where the commission left off. How likely is this to happen, and how concerned should we be?
Well, it's very new, so you don't want to predict too much in advance. But my own view currently is that we should not be that concerned about it for several reasons. One, the Department of Homeland Security, has many critically important functions, whether it's combating terrorism or dealing with the complicated issues of immigration. I don't really think that they want to sort of start on a whole, hunt for voter fraud. And the second reason is that the Department of Homeland Security is actually working with election officials around the country, in a task force as a result of the Russian interference in the elections and the hacking into voting systems in at least 21 states in 2016. So there's now a task force that consists of the DHS, secretaries of the state, local election officials, academic experts, scientists that are really looking at ways to prevent having all this happen in 2018 all over again. And that commission represents, or that task force represents, the solid basis in which the DHS is going forward and taking a detour to pursue Chris Kobach's voter fraud fantasies. I think it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, we also recently found out that the Justice Department asked to have a citizenship question added to the census. How does that figure into this story?
Well, I think that is a real matter of concern for many people, which is that in the current content, it's been a long time since the census has asked people whether they are citizens. The purpose of the census is to count who lives in the United States, whether they're citizens or non-citizens, and to apportion federal dollars, federal grants, federal statistic keeping accordingly. I think especially in this moment where immigrants and non-citizens are very concerned about the consequences of saying that they're non-citizens, especially if they're here illegally or without documents, I think this will discourage people from answering the census questions at all. And I think if you do that, then you end up with a census that is distorted and doesn't count people who should be counted. And of course, one of the outcomes of this would be an effect on the redistricting process, because if you don't have an accurate count of who's living where, it's very hard to draw the district lines in a way that takes everyone into account. So I think this is quite concerning, and I think that it's meeting resistance. The idea is meeting resistance, and it should.
Okay. Miles Rapoport, longtime democracy advocate who served as Secretary of State in Connecticut, president of both Demos and Common Cause. He is currently the Senior Practice Fellow in American Democracy at the Ash Center of the Kennedy School at Harvard and a member of the board of the American Prospect, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Miles, we do appreciate your time with us today and look forward to having you back again soon.
All right, let me just add one thought if I can.
Oh, please do.
And that is that, we focused a little bit here on resisting attempts at voter suppression and combating the kind of false notion of voter fraud. On the other hand, though, there are a tremendous number of things that we can do to improve elections. No reason for complacency whatsoever. So I think that there is a suite of policies that can be adopted at the state level as well as at the federal level that could really make a difference. Just to say a couple of them. I think in terms of registration, allowing people to register and vote on Election Day, same-day voter registration, allowing people to register online, and a new policy called automatic voter registration that Oregon, West Virginia, Connecticut, and a number of states, California, are adopting, can make a real difference in terms of getting people onto the registration rolls. Pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds is a good example. Then I think it's important to have voting be as accessible and convenient as possible. So early voting, voting by mail, vote centers that are in place in convenient places. All of these things can make it, if you make it easier for people to register, easier for people to vote, I think that the turnout will increase. Obviously, the issue of redistricting, we need district boundaries that are drawn fairly so that we have competitive elections that encourage people to vote. And lastly, I would say that it's really important to try to deal with the pernicious influence of big money in our political life. There's no question that the political system as a whole, and I think this affects Democrats as well as Republicans, is tilted towards the interests of people who make large-scale contributions to politics. There are exceptions in the Bernie Sanders campaign, Barack Obama's campaign, even Donald Trump's campaign, but there are exceptions that prove the rule. In most Senate races, House races, gubernatorial races, the people who can really raise that kind of money are more likely to win. And I think changing it to a system where elections are financed by a public financing system, the way they are in Connecticut, New York City, and other places, I think would be a big help. So I guess the point I want to make is that I think that there is a tremendous amount of room for and momentum for positive changes in the election process. So on the one hand, we have to kind of push back against efforts at voter suppression, but on the other hand, we have to make sure that we're improving our elections so that citizens have as much of an opportunity as possible to impact the decisions that affect their lives.
And we should remember that, as you and I have talked about before, this is good for everybody. It's not about Republicans and Democrats. This is about what's good for everybody. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Miles, thank you again for joining us today.
Okay, thanks very much. Talk to you soon.
Okay, sounds good. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure,
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Author and organizer Amanda Litman has 3 words for progressive millennials who want to see change. Run for office. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Breaking news. Trump and company are a murderous mob. Specifically, they've been serial killers of the English language. The word fact was their first victim, assassinated last year by one of Trump's mobsters who poisoned it with a toxic substance named alternative fact. Their latest hit was a celebrated word from the literary world, satire. It embodies the artful use of sarcasm and ridicule to expose the vanity and vice of public figures. But Trump himself killed satire by starving it of any meaning. How can anyone satirize a presidency that is, in reality, nothing but a fully staged satire of vanity and vice? Satire involves exaggerating the flaws, mannerisms, etc. of various characters to convey how corrupt and contemptible they are. But it's impossible to exaggerate the awfulness of an administration that gleefully flaunts its awfulness every day. Take Trump's proposed budget. Please. Delivered just in time for Valentine's Day, it's a stab to the heart of poor people, intentionally increasing poverty and hunger across our country. It would slash programs providing essential food, housing, and even heating assistance for about 50 million Americans, mostly children, old folks, poverty wage workers, and disabled people. Then there's Medicare and Medicaid, which most working-class Americans count on. Candidate Trump promised us that, quote, there will be no cuts in funding for these programs. But his Valentine budget features, guess what, hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. Not only has his cynicism killed satire, but his cynical health care cuts could also kill you. This is Jim Hightower saying, presidential budgets aren't just numbers, they're statements of a president's moral principles. No work of satire could ridicule Trump's morality as effectively as his own budget.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Across the country, a record number of millennials are signing up to run for local office in the 2018 midterm elections. And for those with a progressive agenda, Amanda Litman is there to help. And we say hello to Amanda Litman, co-founder of Run for Something, an organization focused on recruiting progressive millennials as candidates for state and local offices. Amanda's also written a book about her experience. It's titled Don't Just March, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. And I should mention, before founding Run for Something, Amanda was the email director for Hillary for America during the 2016 campaign. Amanda Litman, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And we appreciate your time with us as well. Your book wasn't written just to convince young millennials to run for office, but to explain to them how to actually do it. And one of the first things you explain is about losing. Why?
Well, I think it's important to realize that you shouldn't expect to win your first time out. We have to manage our own expectations. Only 10% of first-time candidates win in their first race. While run-for-something candidates have a higher win rate, most folks lose. That's true across the board. Every candidate you like and care about has lost at some point in their career. But there are good things that happen in a campaign besides losing, or besides the outcome on election day, rather. You organize your community. You hold your incumbents accountable. You fight for the issues you care about. You give people a way to channel their passion and channel their interest in an issue. And you give people a chance to invest in their future. Campaigns are not just about the outcome on election day.
Well, you also write about just how hard it is. What are some of the challenges that a young candidate will face?
Well, you're going to have to convince people that you have the experience, the drive, the intellect, the empathy necessary to serve an elected office. And you're going to have to raise money. It is hard. I don't want to beat around the bush or try and trick anyone. Running for office is hard. However, it is entirely in your control, especially for a local election. What you get to do is decide how much you're willing to work for it. Are you willing to knock doors? Are you willing to make calls? Are you willing to ask for the help that you need in order to run a campaign? If you are, and you're running for something local, it doesn't matter what the polls say, because there's not going to be polls in your race anyway. And it doesn't matter necessarily about what's happened in the past. You can win if you're willing to put in the work.
Well, and no matter how hard it is, and despite the fact that losing is always a possibility, you still insist it's better to run. The book suggests it's worth the effort, that you'll be a better person. But how does that work? How does that make you a better person?
Well, think about some of the things you have to do as a candidate. You have to listen. You have to become a better listener. You have to be an active listener. You have to go up to strangers and ask them what they care about and why they care about it and how you can help them. You learn how to be a better public speaker. You learn how to be more articulate. You sort of learn how the depths of your limitations and your potential. You will never work as hard as you will on a campaign, whether as a candidate or as a staffer or volunteer. And it is an incredible way to see what you're capable of. It's also an amazing experience to see what your community will do for you. See which of your friends, your family, the strangers that you meet when you're campaigning will step up and surprise you of how they're willing to help when you inspire them.
We're speaking with Amanda Litman, co-founder of Run for Something, the organization focused on recruiting progressive millennials as candidates for state and local offices, and also talked a little bit about her book titled Don't Just March, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. Judging by the success of your organization, you've been very convincing. Once a young candidate decides to run, what's the next thing they have to do?
So I think there are three key things you do as a candidate. First, make sure you have a clear why, so know the reason why you're running. What's the problem you want to solve, and how does the office you're running for let you solve it? And why should voters want you to be the person solving it? Be able to articulate that. The second thing is do your research. Look up previous elections and previous races similar to the one that you're working on or running for, and get a sense of the win number, meaning how many people you need to vote for you in order for you to win. That's usually half the numbers of voters in those kinds of elections plus one. So if there are 10,000 usual voters, you need 5,001 in order to win. From there, you'll be able to build out your campaign strategy, meaning how you'll be able to talk to those 5,001 voters as many times as possible. The third thing that you should do is ask for help. So reach out to groups like Run for Something, buy my book, reach out to groups like Emily's List and Wellstone and the PCCC, Latino Victory Project, Collective PAC, and something that Run for Something, the organization, can do is help you identify the best possible groups that will support you. No campaign and no candidate is an island, so we'll make sure that you have every possible resource you need to succeed.
On your website, it says, we'll talk to every single person who expresses interest in running. What happens after the call? How do you decide who to support?
That's a great question. So we do conference calls every week with everyone who signs up on our site. You have a chance to opt into that. At the end of that call, you then opt in to get a screener from one of our volunteers. Our volunteers look for 4 key criteria. Are you progressive, whatever that means, wherever you live, understanding that a Democrat in, say, New York is different than a Democrat in Louisiana? Are you authentically rooted in your community? Are you willing to work hard yourself and put in the effort necessary? And are you interesting and compelling to talk to? If our volunteer enjoys a half-hour conversation with you, a voter probably will too. If you meet those criteria, and between 75 and 80% of our people we talk to do, you're welcome to all of our resources.
What kind of support can someone expect from your organization?
So we do a couple things. We provide you with partnerships. So we work with more than 60 other organizations across the country, ranging from the groups I mentioned, like Emily's List and OFA, to small local organizations, state parties, and the DLCC, to make sure that you have access to everything you need and that those organizations know about your race and your campaign. The second thing we do is provide resources ourselves. We do trainings, we do webinars. We've also written guides on how to file to get on the ballot in every state. The third thing we do is mentorship and coaching. So we've got about 400 mentors and coaches from across the country and across the progressive movement who will do things like help you figure out where the union printer is in your area to make sure you can get your lit made, or help you figure out your field plan or your stump speech, or help you design digital ads, or maybe you make a TV ad. These folks will do that for free as volunteers for your campaign. The final thing we do is endorsements. If you're running a good campaign, if you show us that you're putting in the effort, if you're doing voter contact and running something grounded in local issues and with an authentic connection to your community, we do a little bit of screening and a little more conversation, and then we endorse. That endorsement comes with press, with publicity, with support, and with additional and deeper engagement.
Now, you, of course, have too many success stories to tell them all in one interview, but if you would, Amanda, share a few with us today.
Yes, I love our successes, which feels a little silly to say, but some of my favorites. We worked with Danica Rome in Virginia, who was a journalist, a stepmom, and the first openly transgender woman to be elected to the state legislature. She was running against a homophobe and a real trash person, and an incumbent who hadn't really been challenged in quite some time. Danica could have run on equality and bigotry, and she did make that part of her campaign. But really what she focused on was traffic and local issues and connecting with people about the way that government could make their lives a little easier. And that's why she absolutely creamed her opponent. We also worked with folks like Jennifer Carroll Foy, an African-American woman and magisterial judge in Northern Virginia, who creamed her opponent, in part by talking to people and doing the work. We worked with folks like Heather Ward, a 22-year-old girl who ran for school board outside Philadelphia. She signed up because she was pissed that Betsy DeVos was appointed Secretary of Education. And she said to herself, I'm smarter than this woman. I can do this. She started out afraid to talk to a group of people. Now she's a new school board member in a Republican area outside Philadelphia, and she is so excited to serve the voters that she spent the last year talking to.
That's just fantastic. You know, congratulations to you, your group, and all of the other organizations that you work with, because it's long overdue. And it brings a smile to my face just to talk about the successes that you've had, especially given what we're faced with for at least the next few years. Amanda Litman, co-founder of Run for Something, an organization focused on recruiting progressive millennials as candidates for state and local offices. Also, you can check out her book, Don't Just March, Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. Amanda, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much. It's always fun to talk about what we're up to.
Fantastic. Thank you. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks money and politics with Adam Smith of Every Voice.
Adam Smith joins us from the great organization Every Voice. which is particularly focused on money in politics and how to get the big money out of politics, and people who are maybe using the political system to enrich themselves. Oh, I wouldn't be talking about the Trump family. Adam, hello. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well.
And so here we got Donnie Jr., who's, okay, he and Eric are head of the business,
That's right.
First of all, that their father has nothing to do with anymore because he has totally divorced himself from the Trump business.
Yes, Trump did not divest from the business, and his sons have both said that they provide Dad with regular updates. So I think that he is pretty well in tune with what's going on with his business.
Exactly, you know that he is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Donald Trump Jr. on the business side, so he's over in India.
Yeah.
They're opening a new condo over there, right? That has the golden letters Trump on top of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has
What do
actually
those condos go
has
for?
4 properties.
4 properties.
Four deals, properties happening. So this is one of those licensing deals where other people build them, they put their names on it. But part of the deal
he
is
does all over the world.
Yes, but part of the deal is he actually has to go there occasionally, Don Jr., to try to sell them. So they had newspaper advertisements that said Trump has arrived. Have you and like the run up to his arrival and. People who put down payments on the condos while he's there this week will actually get to have dinner with him. And then the wild thing is tomorrow he's giving a speech.
Well, I want to get to that. But so how much are these condos going for?
I actually don't know the exact price. But they
how
are
many
probably
people in India can afford a condo in a Trump tower?
It's a good question, but I bet as the U.S. tries to work on trade agreements or other things with the Indian government, it would be a steal for a wealthy Indian businessman to buy one of these condos this week. Then he gets access to lobby the president's son. So say Don Jr. hears from 5 businessmen about why a trade deal on or tariffs on this or that would be good. You think he's not going to go back to his dad and say, Dad, I heard these things from these meetings? I mean, that would go against everything we know about the Trump family.
This is all about buying access.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
all about selling the presidency, really.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And it raises these real conflict questions. One, on our side, is how do these sales, how does Trump business in India impact how American foreign policy is decided? And on the Indian side, you have to look at some of these business partners have ties to the national parties there. There's no way they don't have ties to the government. And will then government officials say, we need to do this or this to make sure we keep one of our business people happy and impress the president?
Now, you can see on their side, right? They may not think this is kosher, right?
Yeah.
But they don't dare not show up.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they don't show up, then they won't have any access, really. They're not going to be a player.
Yeah, and everything we've seen from the president is he's a kind of guy who holds grudges. He will react to people who he feels like do him wrong. And you could absolutely see his son going. His son was at Mar-a-Lago with him last weekend. He talks to Don Jr. all the time. There's no way he doesn't know what's going on. And there's no way Trump hasn't asked about. Trump has seen all the news this week. There's no way he's not going to say, hey, what happened?
Right.
And you actually had one of the business partners for him in India tell the Times that it's absolutely true that the name and the ties to the presidency are incentivizing people from buying this.
All right. So there you've got the business side of it.
Yeah.
That's already bad enough.
Yeah.
Now you start to get to this. On top of this, was it today or tomorrow? What?
Yeah.
He's giving a major, foreign policy speech?
Yeah.
He's talking about Indo-Pacific relations. What the hell? Who is he?
It is. I know. And there is this one quote where, like, the spokespeople said, other prominent business leaders, like the head of Netflix and Uber, will also be speaking. I was like, please don't compare yourself, Trump's large adult son, to people from Netflix and Uber. But it's a good question. Nobody seems to know what he's going to say. There's a story in the Huffington Post yesterday where you had a State Department spokesman say, I don't know what he's going to say.
I saw the State Department has nothing to do do with this trip, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Nothing
That's what
about
they're
it?
saying. Yeah.
They're not involved in it?
Yeah.
I believe that.
I do too. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, oh, this is a private citizen. But the thing is, when you're the president's son, if you're speaking at a global business summit right before Prime Minister Modi speaks, how is it not going to influence American
And your
policy?
name is Donald Trump Jr.
Yeah. It's just either like naive of the Trump people or they just don't care.
He is speaking for the administration.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what does he know about Indo-Pacific relations?
He knows about his condo. That's about it. Yeah. No, exactly. It's outrageous. And so, again, that's such an important country and such a powerful and longtime ally of ours, right? But the idea that be taken over by Donnie Jr., right, who, as part of a huckster. I mean, he is a huckster, and he's over there, pumping or pimping these condos, and meanwhile being recognized as a spokesperson for the United States of America on Indo-Pacific relations.
Yeah, there's people won't. We might like the State Department might be able to say this has nothing to do with us. We don't see a difference. People don't see that broadly. People see Donald Trump Jr. as Donald Trump's son, and what he says is what is similar to what his dad thinks.
Okay. So obviously he's in this for the money. He's making, but he's not the only one. I mean, this money, part of this has gone right into his daddy's pocket, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Trump still owns the Trump organization. He is not divested from it. Just because he doesn't have day-to-day dealings mean he doesn't make money from it. And he didn't create a blind trust like he was supposed to. So he'll see these stories. He'll see condos being sold, know that it goes to him. Just like money spent at his hotel in D.C. or anywhere else. Or Mar-a-Lago. Everything goes to him.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned the Mar-a-Lago because I on the train the other day sat down alongside of some guy, recognized me right away, and all he wanted to talk about was Mar-a-Lago and about how often Trump goes there, and who's paying for it. What is the story of Mar? First, well, we know one thing: anytime he goes to one of his properties, it's a big sales job for his property, right?
Yes.
It's whether it's
Free
Sterling,
advertising.
Virginia, or Bedminster, New Jersey, or Mar-a-Lago. It's free advertising.
It's free advertising, and it is a sign to people that if they get a membership there, they may get access to the president. Over the weekend, there are two stories about how he was surveying guests at Mar-a-Lago, both about gun issues and gun safety issues, as well as whether he should fire John Kelly. So it's like, do you want to weigh in on White House staffing or policy? Buy a $200,000 membership to Mar-a-Lago.
If you want to influence Donald Trump, and have his ear, rather than run for Congress or be a United States Senator or a member of Congress, become a member of Mar-a-Lago.
Listen, everything we know about Donald Trump, right? Who do you think whose opinion he would take more seriously? A lifelong servant to the country who is there to serve the country and wants to give the president their best advice, or someone who lined Donald Trump's pocket?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And the thing is, all of this is happening. Like, he's profiting off the presidency.
Some drunk at the bar in Mar-a-Lago.
Right.
Yeah. You talking about Eric Jr. or Eric, right? Sorry, that was offensive. But he's doing this. The thing is that, like, stick with me, is he's doing this. He's profiting off the presidency. Taxpayers are covering it. All the while, everyone, they're trying to require work payments for Medicare and trying to cut Social Security. All these austerity budget measures while he's profiting off the presidency, and it really sticks out to me that where his priorities are. His priorities are personally profiting while hurting everyone else.
Okay. So now back to this question of Mar-a-Lago. When he goes there, it costs taxpayers a pretty penny.
It's unclear sort of how much money is being spent. We have some Secret Service stuff. I think the estimate's about $3 million a trip.
That's what I've heard.
Because it's the cost of the Air Force One.
Last weekend was pure pleasure, right? There was no business.
He did go to Parkland, but there's no way he would have gone to Parkland last weekend if he wasn't going to Mar-a-Lago.
No way. There's no way.
Right.
But some of that. So it's unclear.
Most weekends he goes down there is just to play golf.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And it's unclear how much rooms cost. Are they paying for X amount of rooms for the White House staff that's there? So if it's unclear about that, so we don't have a true picture of how much money is actually being spent at Mar-a-Lago.
Well, yeah, because they'll never tell us that.
Yeah.
But the rooms are not free.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
They're taking up rooms for the top staff and for some Secret Service, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right? Look, the president has to be protected, so he's got to have Secret Service protection. But in terms of somebody's paying for all those rooms,
yeah,
and somebody's paying for the meals, and all that's going into the Mar-a-Lago budget, which is, bottom line, Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's the difference between when, George Bush went to his ranch or when Obama went to Hawaii. That money wasn't going into their pockets, right? This money is absolutely going into Trump's pockets.
Mm-hmm. Right. And is that legal?
It's a good question. I think the question, yeah, probably. The government paying, because the government can pay whoever they want for their stays and that sort of thing.
It stinks, but I think Donald Trump has found a way to, A, run for president, and B, serve as president while making tons of money.
Yeah, absolutely right. And
he has turned the presidency into, a big cash ring.
Yes, and when he goes to these places, he's going, like last weekend he went to some Studio 54 disco party that they had in Mar-a-Lago. Like the night before he ended up...
Donald Trump at a disco party?
Well, there's a picture of him. The thing about reporting in the Trump era is you always have to look at Instagram. And so there are all these Instagrams of him at these places. So he and Melania are just sitting on this couch at this disco party. It's like, and it's a really funny picture. But the thing is, people go and have these events.
Oh, yeah.
They book these events because they know Trump will show up and crash them.
Right. Oh, I see. At Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
It makes sense. You could plan your wedding at Mar-a-Lago, right? He might show up.
Absolutely.
You have a photo with the President of the United States.
Yeah, at one point at Bedminster.
Birthday party.
Yeah, at one point at Bedminster.
When's your kid's next birthday party, Peter?
Yeah, exactly. We just had one this past week.
It might be a little expensive, I will say.
Just missed it.
Last month, the RNC, they had that big fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago that Trump had to miss because of the government shutdown. Yeah. The RNC paid Mar-a-Lago $62,000 last month. So I think events there are a little pricey. I don't know, Peter, I don't know your situation. Maybe you can't afford it, but I just want to throw that out there.
Well, we just had a party, or we totally would have. Gosh, darn.
And this kind of brings around to something you and I have talked about before, which is this little hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, right down the street here.
Yeah.
A few blocks. How is that doing? And that, again, is one of Trump's moneymakers.
Yeah,
right?
they're making tons of money. Last month, I think in the period of a week, both the NRSC, the NRCC, the RNC, and Mike Pence all had events at that hotel. So he's making a ton of money off of it. But there is still that lawsuit from the D.C. and Maryland governments challenging whether he's violating the emoluments clause that way. And last month, a judge appeared more sympathetic to that case than a judge had previously in another lawsuit. So we still have are waiting for an update on how that's going to go forward.
And the General Services Administration with the lease has just basically looked the other way. I mean,
they have,
right?
yes. Yeah. They approved it and looked the other way.
So even though the language said if you're a federal government employee or you cannot have a lease with the federal government, here's the President of the United States violating clearly the terms of the lease, and the federal government does nothing.
There are definitely some criticisms of the way GSA handled that. The memo that they said that sort of approved all of this, and there are some real questions about that lease, but for now, it's everything they say is fine.
Yeah. I just want you mentioned Eric Trump. Donald Trump does seem to be the out front guy for the Trump business.
Yeah.
But, he's not alone, right? I mean, Ivanka still has her line of
So Ivanka did the
products,
same, allegedly did the same thing that Trump did, right? That
put somebody else in charge of the business, but she didn't divest.
That's absolutely right. So she still makes money from it. Those sweatshops in all those foreign countries, she's still making money off of them.
Right. I mean, I don't go online to the Ivanka to look at what I can buy from Ivanka Trump most days, but I mean, if I did, she's still got a line of clothing and accessories, correct?
She absolutely does, yeah.
Ivanka, which are being sold right now on new licenses, for example, for China and other. Okay. And how about Melania?
So Melania does not have any of her own. She doesn't have a line of clothing or any of her own sort of stuff.
She did, didn't she?
Well, there was this situation when she was first inaugurated where her lawyer tried to say that her lawyer said that the presidency would help boost her image, and everybody said, "Oh, I can't believe you're saying that." But then the lawyer sort of removed that from a lawsuit.
Yeah, right.
There was it was a defamation lawsuit. But no, she doesn't have any of her own company or have her own line of stuff. I wouldn't surprise if she did after she leaves, though, depending on what the brand looks like then.
And how about Eric?
Eric runs the company along with Don Jr.
But you don't see him out in front as much.
Yeah, he does some TV, but he's definitely not out. He does some trips and some TV, but I think he's not as forward-facing as Don Jr. I think Don Jr. just really likes the attention. He goes to Republican Party fundraisers around the country, and he's the one I think people see as the politician in the family, other than the dad. But yeah.
I got to tell you, there may have been a George H.W. Bush and then a George W. Bush. There is no way that there's going to be a Donald Trump and then a Donald Trump Jr. in the White House.
No, I don't think so.
Of course, I didn't think there'd be the first Donald
That's
Trump.
right.
I was going to say, right?
Yeah, right. But this whole question then of money in politics has come up. Adam Smith is with us from Every Voice. It's everyvoice.org, right?
Yep.
The question of money in politics has come up again in a big way in the last week since Parkland, Florida, and particularly yesterday with the state legislature in Florida voting down even a measure to allow debate on a ban on assault weapons. And you get right back to how much money the NRA was throwing around this Congress and throws around in state legislatures.
Yeah. And I think they might even have more power in state legislatures just because they're smaller, they're less expensive races.
Get more for your buck.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost you as much to buy a senator.
That's right. And I've been really struck by, I've been really inspired by these students over the past week. I'm sure you've talked about this on the show, and how they're, it's almost, they don't know that they're supposed to be pessimistic, right? They're supposed to think that stuff can't pass. Like they don't know that. And what's also interesting to me is how much they tie money and politics issues to this fight.
They see it, man. They see the connection.
Yes. And it's even Emma Gonzalez in her speech said, if you're going to tell me you have thoughts and prayers, I'm going to ask you how much money you got from the NRA.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Amanda Litman, Miles Rapoport, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.